Hello, I'm Sarah Crompton and welcome to this week's instalment of the WhatsOnStage Podcast with only me, because Alex Wood, who would normally be with me, is off doing something else. But to compensate for his absence, I'm here at the RSC with two of the stars of Rupert Gould's production of Hamlet, which has its press night next week. And I'm really, really excited to be here with Towle, who is playing Ophelia, and Nancy Carroll, friend of the pod, who is playing Gertrude. So Yay! Welcome. Great substitutes for Alex. I wanted to start really just by asking you a bit about this production. I mean, Hamlet's come around, but they always gather such a lot of excitement. And this stars Luke Thallon as Hamlet, as a prince. But I wondered how you've been enjoying the process, Naya, what it's felt like being in rehearsals for the show.
It's been so lovely. I think, like, from day one of rehearsals, actually, it felt really easy with the company, and there's lots of different personalities, but everyone complements each other really well, and I've had, such a brilliant time in rehearsals. It's felt really free creatively. Like, we've spent a lot of time just trying things out without any rules, which has been brilliant. And we've actually been able to keep that up right up until this late period in the rehearsals, which is really lovely. Rupert hasn't sort of rigidly set things too much, which has been very luxurious.
How many Hamlets have you seen in your life? I mean,
I had never seen Hamlet before.
So that's really exciting.
Read it, I'm ashamed to say. Like, when I got the audition through, that was the first time that I had read it. And it was amazing to read it. Like, I have struggled reading Shakespeare's in the past. It's not something that I've always found natural. I had this little, like, dusty Shakespeare anthology that I got in a charity shop, and I found Hamlet, and I just sort of sat and read it from start to finish. Or maybe it took me a couple of days because it's quite long, but I understood it all, which was so surprising. I was able to just really experience it.
And Nancy, I mean, for you, obviously, like me, it's kind of, we've seen a lot of Hamlets, and indeed you've been in a Hamlet as Ophelia.
Yeah, well, as a school kid, I was taken to see Mark Rylance play it famously, which was the uncut 4 hours at the Barbican. Wow. I think it was at the Barbican. Was it the Barbican? Stripy Pyjamas?
Stripy Pyjamas. Yes, I think it came to the Barbican.
Yeah,
it's an RSC production, isn't it?
But it was the first time I'd sat through 4 hours of theatre and felt like I didn't want it to stop.
Wow.
And I'm sure, I've definitely seen it on film a lot. I've definitely caught productions that were then filmed, like Andrew Scott's and stuff on NT Home and things. But in terms of ones I've actually seen, I think not as many as I imagine that I have when I actually go back and think about it. I think I've seen more Scottish plays and more of the comedies. I don't know how that's occurred.
Yeah, it's one of the plays I really try not to miss. I mean, oddly, I was reading this morning about, which we talked before about Ian Charleston's Hamlet. I was just flicking through History of the National Theatre and reading about that, and that's what I missed. More or less ever since then, I've really, really tried always to catch it.
Yeah.
Because it is, as you say, it's such a rich play, and of all the Shakespeares, to me, it's the one that you can do so many different ways and always reveal something new in it.
Well, this season they're doing like 8 different versions or something at the RSC, which is.
Well, they're doing 2. No. Well, they're doing
8.
No, they're doing 2.
Have I made that up?
They're doing 2. Well, in fact, they're doing 3. They're doing 3 because they're doing this traditional.
Yeah.
Then they're doing
the Radiohead
Hail to the Thief.
Yeah.
Hamlet Hail to the Thief, which is
for that
exciting. And then they're bringing in a Pulitzer Prize winning play, Fat Ham, which is another take on Hamlet, but it's a modern play.
Right.
I think that's all maybe
Where did I get that number from? I'm really sorry.
Someone just spread out fake news.
Yeah.
So dangerous.
But that's a testament to the richness of the play, that you can, in one season, have all those different prisms just delivering something completely fresh.
And have you found coming, back to the RSC as well, because you assisted Martha Ritter. How long is it since you were at the RSC?
I think 15 years, which feels like about 5 minutes, but actually 15 years. think it was 15 years, yeah. 12th Night.
What was the
Twelfth
show?
Night.
12th Night.
Which I did when Nell was about 20 months old and she's about to be 17, so that makes sense. Crikey. It feels amazing because these amazing gifts that come to you in unexpected packages, and to be in that room feels incredibly safe. And Rupert's someone I've crossed paths with, but I've never had the privilege of actually working with him on a play or any workshops and stuff. And I just love him. I think that it's the brilliance of fantastic directors is that they can adapt their language and vision from individual to individual and from task to task and wear that quite lightly. I think that's when you feel you're safest as an actor because, I mean, inevitably at any point someone will sort of remove a couple of layers of skin and you see the little bit of stress bubbling away. And then we had 2 weeks off over Christmas as well, which is an odd rhythm.
Yes.
As lovely as it is to know that you're going into Christmas with time off and then you've got a job at the end of it. You build up, and we were a bit like, oh God, okay. So it was a bit of a sort of momentary stumble to come back after Christmas and think, okay, so what were we doing?
Yes.
But it's a lovely, lovely space, and it's constantly exploring what this version is and where we can take it. And rather than talk about it, we'd say, okay, well, what about this? And he's just like, well, let's try it.
Yeah, he gives you about like 3 different suggestions for any, and you try them all, and then it will go, that one was right. Yeah. Try this one. It feels so vibrant, and that it's limitless.
And you have got this amazing company of Yared Harris, Anton Lesser, amazing people. It's very rich. You go down the cast list and you think, wow, I'm interested to see what they do with that part. Yeah. That must be lovely. And all slightly different backgrounds as well. You've all come slightly different ways to Shakespeare, it seems to me.
What it feels like is we're meeting in the middle. What I've grown up with is a more, maybe the language around Shakespeare is dramatic and rich and presented, and then there's a younger generation that are finding something more colloquial and naturalistic and stuff. And I think to have both of those in the room, and then within Rupert's concept and as a company, the chemistry that we have created as a whole, that I think that's a really interesting place to be, that you can have a sort of a naturalistic quality, but that when the lid needs to come off, that's available as well, and there's space for that to happen. And it's both your RSC debut and your Shakespeare debut.
Yeah, that's right.
So how are you? Well, 2 things really. One is, does the RSC mean something to actors of your generation? I mean, was the idea of getting a job with the RSC, does that mean you go, ooh, RSC? Because I suspect it did, 30 years ago. Yeah. So and then what is it like coming into a company that is devoted to Shakespeare and doing Shakespeare?
I feel like, yes, it definitely feels exciting to be working with the RSC, without a doubt, and especially under Tamara and Daniel at the moment, and it
being their first season.
And it definitely, I mean, I said that in my embarrassing little interview on the first day of rehearsal, but it does feel, and it's funny because I think when I got the job, I was excited for the job, but I wasn't really thinking about what it means to be part of the RSC. But when we came in on that first day of rehearsals, I really felt like, oh, this is really, I've got my little lanyard, and it's such a cozy building. Like, you feel really looked after, and it's really exciting to be part of this dedicated space. And
it's not at all grand, is it? We should say.
No, not at all.
If you say the RSC's rehearsal space in Clapham, it sounds vaguely grand, but it's a converted building with a really nice feel.
Yeah, it feels like a hub of creativity and actors and writers and movement directors, and that's another thing I was going to say about our company. Actually, another thing that's so rich about it is there's loads of different skills. There's amazing dancers and movers and people who can sing amazing. Like there's so much going on in the skills that people have, so it adds many different layers, I think.
Did you have a sort of Shakespeare light in your head then? How did you approach actually playing Shakespeare?
I definitely had my Shakespeare training at Guildhall, which was brilliant, and I suppose you do approach Shakespeare slightly differently because the language is different and requires, I mean, all language requires the same investigation, I guess, but it definitely, there is a slightly different approach with it language-wise, but in terms of acting and intention, I think it's the same. So...
And Ophelia, because you both, so Nancy obviously in this production is playing Gertrude, but you have both played Ophelia.
I've heard so much.
No, let's not go there. Although actually, I was really shocked to discover that Rupert saw me play Ophelia.
Yeah.
Which is just an absolute nightmare.
He said that, and on like the first rehearsal, he went, "Sorry, I just got an image of Nancy running across the stage naked as a
No, he didn't. Oh no! Oh God!
This is a podcast that exists to bring you embarrassing moments.
Oh Christ! Yes.
So talk a little bit about. So you did her Bristol
Vic in 1999, and it was Gemma Bodney directing and Colin Tierney who played Hamlet, who I just did rock and roll with last year, who's just awesome. And we were just young green little shoots in the mud coming up too. But Gemma had this concept. It was very much a Victorian Hamlet, and she had read this thing about the nature of psychosis and psychopathic behaviour, and that often the childhoods of people who experience psychopathic thoughts or commit psychopathic acts have either been completely oppressed as children, like stiflingly so, or have had absolutely no boundaries whatsoever.
Right.
And there's this extraordinary analogy of whatever it is that a healthy childhood generally, very generally, obviously needs is some level of boundary, something to kick against, something to form ideas around, something to make them feel safe, something to make them to attach their early identity to. And if that doesn't exist, or there isn't the room to kick against anything at all, there's this mental health track that can lead to a dark place. So she had this idea that her madness or lunacy comes from having had no room to maneuver, and that suddenly the people who represented the structure, her brother and her father and her love of Hamlet, are suddenly ripped from her, and that with that comes this madness. And then said to me in the audition, "How do you feel about taking your clothes off?" And I was like, that would be great. But then also, I mean, it wasn't really a totty moment at all, because I then had ripped my hair out. Right. So I had this bald cap with bits of scab and hair, and then when I handed out the herbs, they were bits of hair. So I think I think nudity on stage is a very particular thing, and it always takes an audience a while to sort of get over, whether it's seconds or minutes or whatever. But I think to see a tableau of slightly straight-jacketed Victorian characters, and then this
it must be
mad
something.
nymph, I think was the effect that she wanted. And it certainly, had an effect.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it was the right effect, but it was worth experimenting with.
Naya, I know you don't want to talk too much about what you're going to do, so everybody's under strict instructions not to reveal too much. But what always strikes me about Ophelia when you read it, and indeed when you see it, is how much impact she has on the play for actually quite a small number of scenes. She absolutely changes how you read the play, and her relationship with Hamlet absolutely changes how you read Hamlet. I always remember Cush Jumbo's Hamlet, when I'm embarrassingly going to forget the name of the actress who played Ophelia, but there was a moment in it where you thought actually it could all have worked out all right, and it was quite late in the play, and it suddenly altered your reading of what you'd seen. How how have you approached it in broad terms? What have you found about having those few very, very famous scenes that everybody can join in with, more or less, and having to create a character? What challenges does that represent?
I suppose my approach with Rupert's guidance has been about being able to see her thoughts and the things that she's pushing and pulling against as much as you can in those small moments. The subtext wise and what she's dealing with and who she might want to be versus who she's allowed to be. What she might want to say, what she has to say instead, those kinds of things.
It's quite a lot of sort of reactive acting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because she's responsive, Ophelia, to her father and to Hamlet.
I think the beauty of the part is that you are you're responsive, reactive. There's the lid, and then when she goes mad, it's like this release. And however you play it, there is something of her then being able to release something that she's been holding or that she hasn't been allowed to let out. So I think that's kind of, that makes it an amazing part to play.
The last time I saw you on stage was in Catherine in A View from the Bridge, opposite Dominic West, which interestingly is a similarly small, but not small. It's a key part, but there's not a lot of words with Catherine. I felt she doesn't have a lot of speech. She has to react again to what's going on around her. Did you feel that they were similar parts?
I mean, they're both young women who are being kind of oppressed by men and abused actually by men that they are very close to, and it's tragic, and it's a shame that I was thinking about this actually like a couple of weeks ago. I was like, I'm sort of playing another woman who gets abused by men, but I think Catherine's very...
because you did the Crucible before that.
Yeah, I did. But I think Catherine is really different to Ophelia, and it's fun. I'm interested that you say Catherine doesn't speak a lot, because I felt playing Catherine that she really does get to speak her mind. She fights right from the beginning. She goes, I want to do this, please let me do this, and she really fights back, and I loved playing Catherine.
But you were brilliant, but also you did, I don't know, when I watched it, you changed your voice. Your voice physically changed so that you had a more grown-up voice by the time you confronted it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, but I think, she really grows, Catherine, throughout the course of that play, because she has to, and she doesn't want to. Well, she does. She really wants to.
She's given permission by the Italian.
Yeah, and by Beatrice as well.
Yeah.
Beatrice really, she doesn't understand at that point why Beatrice is encouraging her, but I think by the end she does. But I found that a very different kind of part, but I know what you mean in that it's a young woman trope.
But they're period plays.
Exactly. You maybe wouldn't write these parts today, but I don't know.
So that's what's interesting, really, as because Ophelia is one of the great Shakespearean women, but it's not one of the great Shakespearean parts in terms of words on the page, and it is because of the period and the time and all of the rest of it. How do you find it, Nancy, watching a part that you know so intimately being done by someone else that you're working with and that you've got a different relationship with as your son's prospective wife?
I wish I could say that I remembered the detail of it. I suppose I felt that I didn't do her justice. I didn't feel that didn't play that part in a way. Maybe I didn't pull off. Maybe I felt I didn't pull off Gemma's vision. Like a lot of women in his plays, they're like pinball machines, aren't they? They're the thing that, significant moments bounce against, and change the course of the play, but you're not ultimately responsible for any of the motion of the ball bearings.
Yeah.
The ball bearings are just doing their own thing, being a bit shiny, and we're going, come on, man. Let's talk about life. Let's talk about love. Let's talk about marriage. Let's talk about blood. Let's talk about whatever it is that they represent within the stories. And often how women, actresses, directors choose to depict those women significantly change the temperature of the whole play, even though that's not entirely sitting on your shoulders. So it is interesting, and I think that you can't help but come at it from a post-Me Too place. And so when we play these women, if we're going to be oppressed or shut down or silenced, you do that consciously. You don't do it because that's what happens to women. You do it, you go, okay, let's talk about why is she silenced? How does the story change because this person no longer has a voice in the room or whatever? And so that's it's important to relish the fact that that's a huge achievement in terms of women's creative trajectory, and it's exciting. Equally, the way that Rupert's directing both of us, has, I think there's those conversations have been had. What I love about what's being found in this production, without giving too much away, is that you really feel that there was a relationship. I think it's a bit like Lear coming on angry. You wonder why Kent's so loyal to him. I think if you feel that there was a love between Hamlet and Ophelia, it's far more interesting.
Much more interesting.
And the play sort of doesn't make sense if there wasn't.
But there isn't anything in the text to substantiate.
Well, exactly. That's the battle, isn't it?
So it's up to a director to say, we as an audience need to see it working before it's broken. And that's lovely.
Did you do any special preparation or reading, or what things can you as a modern woman, if you like, bring to that role?
I sort of feel like just being a woman in your life and in the present day, you're always going to bring your experiences and your understandings to whatever part that you might be playing, no matter if it was written hundreds of years ago. It was interesting actually, because when I first got offered it and I was reading it again, I was sort of thinking, how am I gonna not make her be, for want of a better word, pathetic? No, not pathetic, but there is a reading of it where she's really weak and she really isn't able to. I actually don't think that is correct from the text, because she does stand up for herself. But I remember speaking to my lovely friend Kate Fleetwood, about the part, and I was like, I think I was reading some sort of feminist theory, and she was like, maybe don't get too wrapped up in that, because it's about the human being and you can't get too kind of theoretical about it, which I think is really good and true. I hope that's what she said. If she hears it, she'll be like, I didn't say that.
No,
that's not what I meant.
But it's really hard to act feminist theory, isn't it?
Well, exactly, yeah.
It's really hard to live it, actually, but it's really hard to act it.
But I think you do, and you can act it from just being a woman, and knowing what certain things feel like, so reading wise, I want to shout out this guy, Connor Hanratty, for this podcast called the Hamlet Podcast. It's amazing.
Okay,
and I read the play a lot, and then I also listened to this podcast, and it's incredible. He breaks down Hamlet. Each episode is 10 minutes, and it's maybe 20 lines or something, but he goes into such detail with everything, and it totally opened up my mind to so many things, or clarified so many things. So I really enjoyed that.
Oh, I'm definitely going to. I'm a great believer in shouting out other podcasts, and I am definitely going to listen to that.
Such a fantastic podcast. I loved it. I didn't actually get the whole way through the play because it was so long, but it was really good. I think I was just with it. I sat with it for quite a long time and just kept reading it a lot, and listening to music a bit and thinking of sort of making references and nothing super fancy, but just
it's really interesting, the nature of, trying to take apart. I probably, like Kate was suggesting, that if you take it out of the whole and say, I'd like to play with it and make it this, that's all very well in our heads, and that's what we're trained to do really at drama school, and take it apart and look at it separately. But at some point it has to be slotted back in. And I always remember that thing when Glenda Jackson famously played Ophelia with David Warner's Hamlet in the 60s, and apparently one of the supplement reviews the next day, the title was Ophelia, Prince of Denmark.
Oh, wow.
Because she literally came on and did her thing.
Wow.
But that's great, and yay, Glenda Jackson. But also, that has an effect. Like, where does everybody else fit in that? Because the rest of the play has to work.
How are you finding playing Gertrude?
Well, it's really interesting. Julie Legrand played it when I did it, and I'd seen recently, having watched Penny Downey do it for David Tennant and Juliet Stevenson do it for Andrew Scott, albeit on screen, but it was really interesting. You just sometimes just want to see other people have a go and go, where do you start?
And where did you start with?
Well, it was really, without giving too much away, I think that we tried it a few different ways, and then Rupert said, I'm interested in that one. Right. I haven't seen that one before. So we've moulded it to a vision that he liked and wanted to explore that I really, really wasn't expecting.
Cool.
And that's exciting.
Yeah.
But again, at some point, even though, you could argue there is no subtext in Shakespeare, at some point you've got to let other stuff creep in just to make sense of the lines and make sense of the whole arc of where they end up. But I've loved exploring something that initially when he said, yeah, try it that way, I was like, oh, God. Not to do a disservice to him, but just like, have I got enough, atoms in my brain to bring this to fruition? But I didn't have any expectations. I wanted to just step on board because I knew that the company were so all guns, that was just going to be really exciting to be amongst, and I wanted to be able to open to that. You can't make a Gertrude without a Hamlet, and so I didn't know what Luke was going to offer, and he's just beyond awesome. So that's really just exciting to just be around him and watch him, explore where he wants to go and where he's finding all his different colours. But I sort of love her because there's enough fodder there, whether you believe that she knew about the murder or whether, if she did know about the murder, what does she think about Claudius? Is she really attracted to Claudius? Were they having an affair? If they weren't having an affair, did she always prefer him? Yeah. How did she feel about it? All of that is,
lots
up
of
for
nice
discussion.
Yeah.
But again, all of these things, only a certain percentage is playable. Mm-hmm. But it all goes into the mix of attitude and costume and how much of the physical relationship you reveal either with her son or with her second husband. So it's been really, really interesting. But again, just being with Rupert on this is very unexpected and fantastically empowering. And as somebody that genuinely and generally talks too much, to feel that you can speak, and that all of that is valid, even if it makes no sense.
It felt so, every voice is valued in the room, and he's so collaborative and funny. It's funny.
It's gorgeous.
Brilliant. Well, I can't wait to see it. I mean, everything makes me think it will add to my collection of very fine Hamlets. So thank you so much, Naya and Nancy, for coming to talk about Hamlet.
Pleasure.
What's on Stage podcast.
Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, or leave a rating wherever you can for the What's on Stage podcast. We'll be back next week. Have a great one.